The Australian Curriculum Studies Association would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands and the waterways from where we are all meeting today. We pay our respects to the elders past and present, and we extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. We value the contributions of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples to education and their continued support of the teaching and learning of all Australians. We recognise that for thousands of years, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have been the first teachers, and that we are committed to continue our learning alongside them.
And welcome back to AXA Insights. We've had a wonderful series at the moment on instruction, and we're actually rounding it off with Andrew Rogers here. Fantastic. We're going to be looking at philosophy and some elements of HASS along the way. Now, we know that the ways in which curriculum is delivered vary, and we know that there's a specific content that needs to go into it. But what we have done in this series is really look at the fact that there are many ways to deliver the curriculum and which approach might work in your setting. Now, we know as well that we can get caught up in the pedagogical wars, but is that the only way? Or do we get this lovely approach where we can be holistic in how we deliver the content? So it's wonderful to talk to Andrew today because one of the real passions he has is philosophy. And I do think in order to teach that, you really do need to have a depth of understanding of multiple approaches to teaching. So welcome, Andrew.
Thank you for having me.
Now, we'll do a little bit of a background on Andrew because he's got quite the educational journey. He knows a lot about lots of things. He was previously the chair of what is known as APIS, which is the Association for Philosophy in Schools. He's also been the chair of SCASA in terms of the advisory committee, and that was for philosophy as well.
Philosophy and ethics, yeah.
Philosophy and ethics, wonderful. Really importantly, he was one of the secondary Australian Teachers of the Year at the Education Awards, so has got a lot of credentials behind his work. He continues to teach ethics and philosophy at ATAR and General, and is also a HASS teacher, so has got a lovely spectrum of different subjects that he brings together into the classroom. Interestingly, he's also got children taking part in, now I'm going to get this wrong, this word, because it's the Perth Philosophon.
Yes.
Quite a difficult word to say there. And also the Australasian one and the WA Ethics Olympiad. But not just all of that. He's also had his work published in his previous role in the UK in the Journal of Philosophy. So big welcome to you today, Andrew.
Well, thank you again. It's very exciting to have this conversation, Anna. So great.
Yeah, wonderful. Now, you've obviously been on quite the educational journey, and you obviously started in the UK and you're now in Australia. And the area that you specialise in philosophy is probably not that familiar to many people, or it's not something that, many people would be able to talk about at ease. Could you just give us for a little bit of an insight in philosophy and why you think it's a very crucial part of the curriculum?
Sure, I'd be more than happy to. So the main focus I teach the philosophy for at the moment is through the ATAR pathway.
Yeah.
And the sort of breadth of philosophy we do there is very much thematic based.
Right.
A number of courses do it as like a history of ideas. So, you start from Plato and then move your way forward right up to, modern philosophers like Peter Singer. But the approach we do is a lot more thematic. So we just look at each of the main sort of branches of philosophy. So we look at a theory of knowledge. Yeah. We'll then look at this idea of obviously ethics and values, which fits in there with aesthetics and various other aspects to do with that. And the final bit is all about knowledge and how we know. We also, which is I think very unique to the West Australian philosophy courses, that we teach logic as a big part of that as well. So this whole idea of critical thinking, plays a fundamental part to it. So that's the sort of the overview, if you like. So it's a very rich and varied course. In terms of what we're trying to do is we've got some skills. So we're trying to get the students to obviously know and understand the philosophy, but also we're teaching those sort of higher end skills of critical analysis, evaluation, have the ideas actually stood any merit, and we almost like have an interrogation of those ideas along the way. And then the students have also got to write their own. So they've actually got to have the ability to construct an argument and to put forward their own response to, prompt questions.
And what a valuable skill that is today, especially in the 21st century thinking. And I think for me, when, you're talking there about it and I'm thinking in my head, the world of AI. you know, I'm looking at what's happening in the news, and you're getting a very, you know, I think when you look at just in general the perspectives on what you're being driven to through the media or viewpoints that are being taken, and I think that's one of the big things that we struggle with, because we are absorbing huge amounts of information at a very surface level. And we also know that within our social media content, we are given a lens of which the algorithm is working for us.
Yep.
So that critical analysis of being able to take a viewpoint and take a vision and also understand it, I think is really important, because we do see this rise, and I think we've seen the rise in the politics in other countries where this mass sway happens, and it's actually lack of knowledge which drives it.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that comes out time and again, in our classroom discussions, is very much within that political sphere, is just how narrow some of the perspectives and viewpoints that have been taken, not only by the politicians, but also those who have, listened and taken on their ideas for themselves. And, the result, I think, is this very divisive set of society we've got, because it seems to be a move away, whereas what we try and do in philosophy is we actually try to bring those ideas together and try to find some form of synthesis to try and work together. It's bedrock really is respectful inquiry. So it's learning how to disagree, but disagree well, and in a way that maintains a relationship rather than separates it and divides one.
And that's really interesting, because it leads nice into the next question, because that when you approach teaching philosophy, it's quite different, I can imagine, because you've got to take a very different approach, in the sense that you actually need to dig really deep, because you can get the content and whatever that might be, but the mindset is actually what you're probably assessing in a lot of ways, and thinking that that metacognition of what's going on. So you sort of briefly mentioned, but what do you think is probably the main instructional approach that is taken in teaching philosophy?
It's I guess, like anything, it's a range. But, to take your first point really about teaching people to think themselves is fundamentally the biggest thing they need to do. And certainly when perhaps they come to me at year 11, they may not have actually questioned very much that's been given to them before. And certainly it's trying to break down this idea that I, as the teacher, don't necessarily know everything. In fact, there's actually a lot I don't know.
And that's a vulnerability that many teachers don't have, isn't it?
I mean, I see myself with these ATAR kids as being very much a co-inquirer. So I'm very much learning alongside, if that makes sense. So obviously I've got a, depth of knowledge with which I've gained and want to be sharing to the students as part of what we do. But fundamentally, I want them to be able to think for themselves. And I use the knowledge that I've gained as counter arguments perhaps, or ways of making them question a little bit further than perhaps they ordinarily would have done. So it's a real mixed bag. I mean, there's elements of real deep-centered questioning the assumptions of which they have previously invested everything in, never thought to question before. Compared to then, the approach of being able to criticize respectfully, and then building the ideas into their own, and then to be able to guide them to be able to create a coherent argument along the way.
Very much. And when you're talking about that, I think with the idea of having those arguments and making them, but also I think it's very important, when you look at children being able to accept that. We're in a world where sometimes we can't accept because we see it as criticism, as opposed to actually going, oh, I'm seeing your viewpoint. And I think we do get caught up, and we know that ourselves, even in general, as people, it's actually a real skill to be able to do that and go, I appreciate your point of view, but I can respectfully argue my point of view.
Very much. I mean, it's very much what we call a community-based approach. I mean, in many respects, it's a question of, okay, here's my idea, can you help me make it better? Rather than here's my idea, you're going to now shoot it down. So, it's completely opposed to the adversarial nature of debating, which is very much with that way in mind, and which is where many of our politics comes from as well. Look at the debate chambers, it's all completely adversarial. I just think it'd be really refreshing if they took more of a philosophical approach to it, recognize that it's not perfect, where can we strengthen it, and can we work on this together?
And we talk about that, the 2 ears for listening, and as opposed to the one mouth, but I think that is actually something that we're losing a lot of, because we're actually moving on to the next question, and it's actually that thought process of going, I'm hearing that, and then I'm moving on, because that's actually a stage, definitely. Now, just thinking about, we talk about the philosophers, and I was just thinking when you was talking there about the change of the role of the teacher, that sage on the stage to the guide by the side, and especially the works of a lot of philosophers. And, you know, I'm sure a lot of people could tell you Aristotle or Plato.
Sure.
But I think in that sense, it alludes to the elite, the academic elite. So you've got people saying, oh, well, I don't really understand philosophy, so it's too highbrow. Oh, I better not go in there. And I don't understand the nuance of all the kind of understanding. So we often see that it's perceived by many to be for the academic, those who are in that space. But how do we dispel that myth and really make it an inclusive thing that is really critical?
And I think that's one of the big assumptions that I'm certainly facing as a teacher, because when you present it to the students and also to many of the school administrations, it's very much seen as this, that's for the extension kids.
Yes.
But where I think philosophy really does a great job is that it's appealed to everybody. I mean, ultimately, everybody has an opinion, and and that's certainly part of what I like to elicit first of all. But then at the same time, it's drilling deeper, and it's sort of asking why. What are your reasons for having that particular approach? And the minute you start to give reasons, that's when we have an argument in terms of where the philosophy comes in. So, I mean, I use the skills in philosophy wherever I'm able to, no matter what subject I'm teaching. You mentioned HASS earlier, and I use it a lot in my HASS teaching because I'm looking for those, really deep, meaningful issues. So in history, for instance, there's a huge focus on war. And so when we bring out this idea about is war justified, then you've got this whole idea then of no matter how intelligent or not you are, you're still able to have a perspective on the justification of war. And then we're then engaging meaningfully in the subject. And many of the biggest gains I've seen through teaching this have come actually from students who aren't traditionally academic. I think one of its core strengths in the way that I teach the subject is because it's so discussion based, there's not so much of a focus on the literacy. And so those students who traditionally do struggle with their, literacy aspects, all of a sudden are freed up, if you will, just to be able to participate on an even playing field. And then they are able to construct and build their arguments in a very similar way to those traditionally able students would be able to.
And I think, the voice is so powerful. Having your voice is empowered, that's very powerful. And you're right, we can't rely on the pen and paper method or being able to get it down.
Sure.
We need to be able to, let's face it, when you go into your careers, it's actually not what you write, it's actually how you hold yourself in an environment or go to that board meeting or get your thoughts put across, how it works. But I think I'm really interested there was that idea of the just war. I think that's even more important. I think I was actually watching a program on Woodstock yesterday. Right. And it was more about the fact that, the reason why they were petitioning in the Vietnam War and a lot of wars, in hindsight, we look back and go, was that just what was the gains that were made? And similarly, when do we go to war and what is the advantage to those who go to war, especially when we've had that with the Middle East for many years. So that's really important, I think, and not so people can make those informed decisions.
And I think that's the difference between having an informed argument and an opinion, which may very well have come from the parental dinner table or come from something off social media or somebody from an extremist point of view that they've heard or bought into somewhere. And I think one of its most powerful is that philosophy can and does challenge those real perspectives. There was a great film actually made a few years ago set in the Troubles in Ireland where it was a school that was really, really struggling, and the way they combated that was they brought in philosophy.
Wow!
Because the students were then able to talk respectfully, to understand each other's opinion, and as a result, they became much more of a cohesive community. Such a really, really powerful case study and value of what it does.
100%. Well, especially when we're looking at all of these programs for well-being.
Yes.
They're coming in, and obviously it is something that's important. But I think you're right. Actually, going back to some of that crux of it, it's like the communication elements and being able to have that, and being able to talk to one another. And we lose that with students, I think, don't we? Because it's so much instantaneous, and it's the scrolling and the doom scrolling, and it goes through.
That's right.
So that's a really good point I think you've made there. If you can bring that into schools in order for that to be a wellbeing conversation as well, really important. So we've mentioned, I think, before about the critical and creative thinking. Now, I know this, especially when you come and you're approaching a curriculum and you've got your silos effect, and then suddenly it's like, and these are the skills you've got to teach, and this is what we're going to teach alongside, and you kind of go, how do I do that? How do I put inquiry skills in here? And how do I put the critical creative? And how do I do ICT capabilities opposed to digital technologies, there's a lot that you have to do, and that kind of cross-curricular element, you mentioned HASS. We have to know one to know the other. And we can get caught up in especially in a secondary environment where you're this department, you're that department.
Yes, that's right.
Now, we talk a lot probably in your subject area about inquiry learning, that kind of getting the children really involved in it. But, that's about the subject matter and kind of the nuances. Now, with something like philosophy, you still need to have quite a strong knowledge base, because I certainly wouldn't be able to talk to you about Aristotle or Plato or some of the other ones you described. So surely there's an element of explicit teaching that you need to do. So when do you bring that into the cycle?
Oh, look, it's a really interesting question. Because I mean, you said I don't know too much about Aristotle or Plato. I actually think we know more than we think.
Yeah,
this is what I try and bring out from the students, because you may not know, where Plato lived, or what books he wrote, but you do know about justice. You do know what makes a good society. How people should live together.
Yes.
And if you're fundamentally with the young people, that's what I'm ultimately trying to do, is delve into those issues. So you talk about, the explicit learning. Socrates is often described as, a midwife, because he helps people give birth to their ideas. And in some ways, that's sort of what I'm doing in the classroom. So, a typical, philosophy inquiry would just be where we give the students something to perhaps think about.
Yeah.
So a stimulus or a provocation.
Yeah.
And from that, the skill of the teacher is then to bring out the ideas that the students have about that particular issue. So we were talking about war earlier, so you could, for instance, set up a news clip about one of the recent conflicts, and you open it up to the students and say, so what questions have you got? What do you find interesting? What do you wonder about? And we're not necessarily looking for the facts about who's fighting who and why. It's all about, well, are they being treated fairly?
Yes.
And is the war being fought in the right sense? Is the aim of this conflict a good one to be moving its way towards? And from there, the sort of explicit teaching, if you like, really comes from the students. And when we've got that sort of initial engagement, we might then go to some of the texts and might say, okay, well, let's go and have a look at what this just war theory is, and we will present them the theory. Now, here it's quite different, because I'm not asking them to learn it for a test. I'm not asking to go away and just revise these terms and write it down. We're trying to see, well, can we apply them? So we've now got an understanding of the just war theory from St. Augustine, or and then we can say, does it actually fit this current war in the Ukraine? Does it fit with this war that's going on in Gaza? And so that's really, I would say, the explicit learning. There's always that critical evaluation and analysis that's going on at the same time. It's not an add-on. If you finished your work, you can then go on and do this. It's core and fundamental to what it is we're doing.
Yeah, and I think I was just, when you were talking there, I'm just thinking from an education perspective, I'm thinking when we learnt the key scholars in education, the Piaget and John Dewey, you don't actively think about them when you're teaching a concept. You go, oh, this was what Piaget said, or this is, or look at Bloom's taxonomy. You're going, I sometimes attach the word or that to what I'm doing. So it's actually lovely that you can bring it up and go, I don't need to specifically know what it was, but I know what they gave us in order to make things. No, that's a lovely way of doing it.
I mean, certainly where, with something that can be abstract like philosophy, I think the key is bringing it to where the students are at and helping them to, find that lock or that hook, if you like, just to gauge their interest. And then, as we've sort of found out, they actually know more than they think they already did in the past. In many respects, it's a very complex subject to teach, but in many respects, it's also a very exciting and easy one to grab attention with, because there's some really big meaty questions.
And don't we do that? That's one of, I think, the biggest things we do with children, is we don't give them credit for their ability and what they are capable of.
And there's still a big discrepancy, I think, between what I'd call academic philosophers who say children just can't think at that sort of rigor. And if you look back to the what we call the philosophy in schools movement, went back to Matthew Lipman in 1960s America, just at the time of the Vietnam War.
Yes.
And the reason he brought in this approach was he was of the belief that adults who are protesting either for or against the war can't really hold an informed argument as to why. They just know one way or the other. And he thought, well, this is an endemic problem with society. We've actually got to get to the nub of why this is.
Yeah.
And so he introduced this idea of children being encouraged to think for themselves. And this was happening at elementary school.
Yes.
And being able to, bring out these ideas that they have, and then, helping them to strengthen them with, reasons, examples. But also to recognize the challenges put across by other ideas, and then they become this naturally informed, respectful citizen, as opposed just to being a number scorer and a test result.
And that, I think, and just talking from personal experience, what I found, especially when our recent elections were on, and we were having conversations as a family unit, and I remember one child saying one thing and my other child saying, but we don't follow them as a family, we're this team. And I remember just kind of going, failing as a parent, saying, have I exposed them to enough, or I'm just leading them down this path and going, you will listen to this. And that's one of those things, I think, when we look at it as a whole, a lot of it comes from the influence you've had around you, and you have those viewpoints, and it goes along that. And I like the point, you're saying about these philosophers when you're young. And I always have this from my subject area, that if I went into a kindergarten class and you asked how many children were scientists, the teacher would tell you every single child was a scientist. And as we go up that chain, we know the kind of the STEM pipeline just disappears off and we lose that. So how come when we've got all these children, they're philosophers, they're scientists, they're authors, they're mathematicians. And we would quite confidently as a teacher say that.
That's right.
But unfortunately, we're not getting that through the whole education system.
No, I would agree, and it's something that I sort of see firsthand, because but again, I think this is why philosophy is such a valuable subject, because its main thrust, if you like, is based on that curiosity. This questioning that gets everybody interested, and if you haven't got a good question, you've not really got a philosophical response to it. So you've actually got to start with these questions, and this is why the process I was describing earlier about leading from the students' questions, their own questions, is so powerful, and it fits in with this inquiry approach, but it's training them, if you like, or enabling them to want to engage in those questions.
And I love that, because I've spent a lot of time from a science perspective about the questioning, the what, the why, and especially in the early years when you're doing something and you might say to a little one, why? And a why is a huge when you think about the cognition of that, that's a huge concept.
It is.
Because a child to say why, as opposed to saying what's happening here, or can you see, and then. So this is really important, I think, when you're talking about it, because it's that you're providing the provocation for why to happen.
Yes, that's right.
And it is a huge concept, and I think we often use that flippantly. Why is that? But we don't give the children the scaffolding to be able to say why.
That's right. And again, that's part of what we do in the philosophy classroom, is we teach these skills. So we encourage them to use because words, certainly in the early classroom. And then obviously when we've got a because word, then we have followed that with a reason, and then we open it up and say, well, is that a good reason? Because not all reasons are good. Some reasons are mistaken, some reasons are greatly mistaken, and then that comes that critical thinking that comes in. Okay, we've got one answer, are there any others? And then which is then the best answer?
And the evidence, using
Where does
evidence,
the evidence go?
and
exactly right.
And that's consistent across all things. You look at literacy and all those things.
Right.
Have you provide the evidence to make a point? It's interesting, because just leading on to the next question, this subject specifically, you really need to have quite a strong skill set. I look at a teacher and they need to have a broad understanding and an actual understanding of instructional practice, not just one way of doing it. And similarly, the knowledge and understanding of philosophy as well, because as we've talked about before, is not known. And I would argue that they need a high degree of experience, and that's quite a tough one. But if you're a graduate, and we know that for a lot of graduates, they teach out of field because of staff resourcing, or they're in regional and rural areas. And with, that experience, it's really tough for us to be able to say, go away and teach philosophy.
Yeah, it is.
So how do you think we could support graduate teachers to teach it effectively?
Yep, that's a really good question. I mean, I guess the easiest answer to do is to buy into this particular pedagogy with which I was describing. And the reason I'm sort of fumbling around a little bit, I mean, there's a lot of courses that are offered, to run this, and our professional association offers just a 2-day hands-on practical course about how to do it. But when you've got those very basics, it's actually a lot more straightforward than you would perhaps give it credit for. I mean, I was talking earlier about being a co-inquirer. I remember year before, I do an elective subject, which is all about the ethics of games. And I always open it up to the students and I say, so, where are your interests? And we start thinking about what games they're interested in. So last year it was all about Mario Kart and Wii games, which I could understand. The year before, it was all martial arts and things like MMR, mixed martial arts and this sort of thing. I knew nothing about that.
No.
But so this was me now, putting myself in the shoes of a graduate teacher. I felt so disempowered because this was their focus. But at the same time, it was the most powerful learning experience that the students were open to, because it didn't matter that I didn't know the difference, of moves and what was in the rules and what wasn't in the rules. What mattered was their ability to actually talk about, things like mixed martial arts. Is that a good way to play sport? Is it a good, is it a fair competition in terms of what it is that they were talking about? And their level of argument and learning was just through the roof. And I'm sitting there going, I'm sorry, pretend I'm, 5 years old. What does that word mean? But then I think, when we do that level of questioning, our assumptions that, the kids all know this goes because, a lot of them didn't know. I was relieved that I was asking that question as a co-inquirer, being able to learn alongside them. And they had that freedom then to pursue where they were going. And all I was doing was just asking questions. How does that, change your response? Does that then mean we have to look at that a bit differently? And then you're just, coaxing, helping them perhaps give birth to better ideas in terms of where they're going. So, if you are, this graduate in a regional area, I was, really, really encourage this idea of, dialogic teaching or learning, I suppose, is rather than teaching, and having the confidence to be able to step back and allow the students perhaps to be able to demonstrate their own thinking and their own ideas, but knowing when it's appropriate to step in, change course perhaps a little bit, tease for deeper understanding. I think it's fundamentally a really, really valuable, relatively simple thing to be able to learn.
And how rich is that for you as a teacher?
And that's the beauty of it,
isn't it? I think we don't give ourselves credit as teachers for how much we're learning on that journey and where we've come from. I think, we kind of come out of university sometimes going, I know it. I'm going to get my class and off we go. And it throws us when we have those moments where we, as you're saying, that disempowerment of, I don't know what I'm doing. And you talk about gaming. It's quite interesting because I worked alongside a brilliant person who was really into gaming, did her PhD in the kind of elements of it, gaming and education. And I remember, here I am, digital technologies, and I do coding and programming, but I'm not a video game. It would drive me up the wall, you doing that. But I think I remember seeing her passion for just in general games and then strategy. And I've got a brother-in-law who's CEO of a big company, and he said to me, I didn't learn what I did through university. And as a high level, he said, I learned it through strategy of game. And I played hours playing games. And that's how I did it. And I remember just going, wow, it's how we change our mindset to seeing the benefits, And I think we're caught up suddenly in a world where we see a lot of things that children are doing as repetitive and they're not engaging, whereas actually there's another level, isn't there?
There really is, at a much deeper level as well. I mean, I can certainly reflect on my own practice, and you talk about those areas in which you're knowledgeable and passionate. I think I teach those really badly because all I want to do is share my knowledge. I've got all this information which I want to pass to you, and it just becomes one way. I'm just telling them all this stuff. Whereas if I don't know it to tell them, we have to inquire together. And then I think, our level of learning is that much richer as a result of it.
And I have to say, I would have exactly the same experience. That, I love things like, philosophy and English, literature, love them. But actually, I'm a better science teacher. And I would never, I'd say that they're places that you put yourself in an uncomfortable place is actually where you see the most benefits.
For you and the students. They will also benefit from seeing you in that position. And there's a real power coming when you say, well, I actually don't know the answer. Let's try and find it out together. And that, I think, is just wondrous for the students to think, wow, okay. And then we're all in it together again. And it's a real, level of the playing field.
And we talk about, and generally, that kind of that person just talking a lot, actually, as you're saying, giving you the knowledge and just there you go. Go away.
Open up your head, pour it in. That's not your full now. Go and live your life.
We talk about that with the education of that vessel and how people view it. But, I think at the very start, talked about as a teacher, all you want is a child to engage and learn.
That's right.
That is our core purpose. It's not a reflection of us if you get a really good A grade.
Yes.
Because you might never do that subject again. What we really want to say is, oh my gosh, you're still interested in philosophy.
That's the thing.
You're still doing it 20 years later.
Yeah, this is lifelong learning that it really encompasses.
Yeah.
You know, it's, I think, you know, going back to our original philosophers, I think it was Socrates who said that, you know, philosophy begins in wonder. And it really is that sense of wonder that, you know, gets lost in our education system, in the pressure to get, you know, exam results, to get numbers on the paper that will, you know, open other doors for you.
Yes.
And in so doing, they don't want to, you know, to go near the subject ever again, which I think is so desperately sad.
Isn't that just the saddest part of it, where we actually go, we've actually sometimes driven people out of something that we're passionate about because we've put so many restrictions on.
Yes, that's right.
And that kind of, we haven't given them enough options to move out of that.
Yeah.
So it is very interesting, because we know that this is really part of the curriculum, and, you know, the delivery of content, and it's very important. But I think, especially for your subject, it's the assessment that's actually quite the crux of it, because you're not just assessing how much you know.
No.
You know, oh, you know these philosophers, you know theories of a just war, you know this, and we can tick those boxes and say, yeah, they've done it, they can write it on paper. But you're really assessing the thinking behind that, and you're trying to work out how they can form an argument, and what if they actually understood it. So I suppose, from a point of view, where on earth do you start if you're going to design an assessment to cover everything? Because it's huge.
It is. I mean, and then that, you know, I think is a headache at the best of times. I mean, look, for the ATAR sessions, you're very restricted. You know, it's got to replicate the exam, and, you know, if you want the students to be ready for the exam, they have to have an understanding in a classroom about what that actually looks like. But when you're freed up from, you know, that sort of idea, and you know, sort of approach some of these subjects lower down the school, I think you get a lot more excitement to be able to do things differently. And you know, the beauty of the school I'm currently at means that we teach philosophy from year 7 right through to year 10, and then it becomes an optional subject.
Yes.
And so trying to open, you know, the minds of the youngest students in year 7 is really challenging.
Yeah.
And then, you know, secondly of all, how do you then actually assess whether they've been thinking or not? So, you know, we've tried a slightly different approach this time around. So we've started with Plato's allegory of the cave. You know, very famous story. You know, if you know it, if you don't, it's very simple. Where there's, you know, 3 prisoners tied up in a cave, and one of them suddenly escapes and then gets to the outside world and suddenly sees a whole new environment around him, which blows his mind, and realizes the reality he'd currently seen in the cave isn't real at all. Yeah, we challenge the kids to retell that in a manner of their own choosing. Now, the understanding comes in the retelling of the story. That's a very, very low level task, and some of the kids will, you know, make us a model diorama, some will go into, you know, Lego Minecraft and do something like that. Others just prefer, you know, the written narrative approach, and that's, you know, it's fantastic. They understand the allegory. But the real deep learning comes about, well, what does that then mean? And so we've actually got to then, you know, contemplate, well, what was Plato actually trying to say here? And this is something that's, you know, been really open ever since Plato's time as to what he was really trying to get to. And this is, for me, where the deep learning comes. It's giving students that opportunity to be able to think and not just tell the story.
And that's a luxury of time, which we probably as teachers don't put enough in. You know, we can get a test result and go, well, the child knows that.
Yes.
As opposed to going, can you explain how you got there? You know, we talk about that, you know, like in a maths context. Oh, you've got the answer, but have you shown you're working out?
Right.
And working out might not necessarily mean understanding. It just means that you've written the steps down, and you get marks because you've written the steps down.
Yes.
But actually, that indulgence of saying, this is, but tell me about it, talk to me about it. And not only will they be able to explain that, but their passion for it.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And, you know, certainly when a lot of these, you know, projects came back in, there were students who actually chose the oral approach to do it. You know, they recorded themselves, you know, presenting their idea. And that was just absolutely gold, because, you know, some of them actually brought in people from home for their perspective. You know, those who got really, really good grades gave me 2 or 3 different ideas, and they actually had different voices to represent those ideas, and they then went on to offer a critique about why that one's better than the other one. And you know, and it's just an absolute joy just to, you know, to see a student want to invest that much work into a bit of learning they're doing.
And it comes back to that idea of inclusivity. Like, you know, you're talking about, you know, the children who haven't maybe got the literacy skills, and I talk about this a lot with, you know, in my area of science, that it shouldn't be a detriment to you that you can't do one thing. You know, if you're going to come into my science room and you can't read or write, there's no point doing a worksheet.
Yes, agreed.
You know, absolutely 0 point. So I don't want that to then become a negative impact on you, because the subject that you're really passionate about and you love the space and science, but because you can't write on a piece of paper, therefore you're not given. And we talk about this, don't we? Giving children the opportunity to showcase their learning.
That's right.
And it is hard as a teacher, because my goodness, you've got to get through a lot of work, and it's time poor.
Yeah, very much so. But at the end of the day, what are we assessing? Are we assessing a student's memory? You know, how well are you able to go away and learn a set of facts and then write them down in the test? Are we assessing a student's ability to read and write, or actually assessing something a bit more meaningful in terms of their ideas, their ability to construct and to critique other things that are put in front of them? And I think it's so much more engaging for the student to give them that freedom of choice.
And we talk about, you know, I think you mentioned that the amount of content that we have to look at. And we've been very lucky on this sort of series. We spoke to Dr. Emily Ross, who is one of our board members, and she talked about curriculum being like a roadmap, and you put the big roadmap out. And you can either take the straightest distance from east to west. You can do whatever you want to do, and you're going straight, and you go through the straight roads, and you're taking it all in. Or you might want to go and detour down to South Australia, then you might go up to Northern Territory, and then you get there at the same point. But you've had these really valid experiences that inform how you get there. And I also remember having the lovely luxury of speaking to Summer Howarth, who does amazing stuff in South Australia and the Northern Territory, and she talked about the curriculum being like a smorgasbord. So you don't need to try every single piece of cheese to understand what cheese tastes like, or what you're going to eat your cheese with your crackers. So I'm going to eat my cheese on, you know, my spaghetti bolognese, but I don't need to know every single cheese to understand it. And I think that's something where we get lost with the curriculum, because we take it so literally and forget maybe that just because they don't know about that they aren't capable of knowing about that in another context. And,
you know, certainly it's one thing that I've really noticed within the HASS space as well. It's incredibly, you know, content heavy. But at the same time, I also know, you know, students' retention. You might tick every single, you know, curriculum dot point within year 7, but how much of that are they actually going to retain when they come back to it in year 8? And, you know, the beauty of the curriculum is that these concepts get built on, and they get developed, you know, in a deeper way as they move through the years of the school. And when you take this sort of philosophical approach, it actually gives you this freedom, if you like, to follow those real nuggets of gold that you know maybe hidden away, and it needs a little bit of uncovering to get there. But these are the real deep learning experiences the students remember. You know, they may not remember a specific date, but they certainly remember, you know, how archaeologists, for instance, might, you know, learn about the past in terms of making a theory based on the evidence. You know, these are the things they're going to remember,
and have that ability to think as well. I think when you get more information, you know, I talk a lot about with someone the other day about, you know, people were so in uproar because Pluto had been redefined as not being a planet, and it really was frustrating to them. And we know in progressive subjects as well that you have to have the ability to take on new concepts and realize that your previous knowledge of something or existence, you know, there's a lot of great work being done here in WA, changing the idea of Newtonian physics to Einsteinian physics and changing it. And I think having that philosophy of going, I'm open-minded to change.
And also having, you know, a recognition that it's actually okay to change. And it's a real, I call it a real courageous. So, you know, so many of the, you know, classroom discussions that we have, you know, they're actually quite physical. You know, students out of their seats and they're standing at different sides of the room to represent where they see their response. And then occasionally you'll see somebody move. And you just say, well, what's happened? Why have you changed? And they say, oh, well, I just listened to what that person said. And I thought, okay, that's better than what I had. And it's, you know, being able to help them to realize that that's actually not only okay, but that's absolutely amazing, because they've changed their view based on the evidence that's provided to them. And how much in our society do we hang on to the right answer because we like it, even though the evidence is pointing in other areas? And we're almost scared to let that go and move on to something that might be different, better, you know, whichever it might be.
And someone's told us it, so therefore it must be true.
That's right.
Been questioning.
Said, so therefore they must be true. Yeah, exactly.
You know, and I think we've had discussions before about that questioning of going, but just because you've told me and you've said there's data there and it's evidence, but what does that, have I got that luxury of time to go, is that evidence relevant to what that situation is? You know, that's a key point. But what really, and it's so funny because we've actually covered so much ground, and it's a bit of a shame that we have to get to the end of the podcast because it is so beautiful, and we could talk all day, which is good because we're philosophy. But what I've really just sort of thought, that kind of talk where you were talking about is remembering, and you know, I suppose this last question always stumps people because I think educators by nature have had many people in their lives, but is there a few teachers who've inspired you to get to where you are today?
It's so hard. I think back to my own days in the classroom as a student.
Yeah.
And I remember that the teachers who stand out, I mean, we're talking, 40 plus years ago when I was in the classroom myself. And, there are obviously those teachers which stand out and inspired me to actually go into the classroom and become a teacher. I think of my early mentors, who steered me on this journey, this, raw person with all these, mismatched ideas coming out of university into the classroom, and actually took the time to shape that.
Yes.
I think about some of my colleagues who I work alongside, who do some amazing things in inspiring, young people to get interested in their subjects and to continue to inspire them as they leave school and often come back and talk to them about where they're going. But I think, in all honesty, some of the best teachers have been my own children, if that sounds a crazy thing to say.
Listening to what you're saying, then I go, I think I know where he's going to go there here. That just, exactly that.
The reason being, I had my own very, looking back now, rigid ways about what I thought, a child of mine should be doing. And I've, had the joy of having, two very, very intelligent, but also very lively children of my own, and their pathway has been completely different from where I thought it would be. But I've learned to have the courage to listen to them. I've had to learn to be able to change direction, as we were just talking about, changing our minds. And I've actually had to accept that maybe what I originally thought is not the best thing after all.
Yes,
it's being open to the evidence, being open to the person.
Yes,
tailoring, your parenting approach, if you like, to the person who's in front of you rather than the person who's in the textbook, and then being able to adopt and adapt a whole different approach to parenting.
And I think that is a really good point, because when we actually look at education, the crux of it is relationships.
Exactly.
And we can't teach a curriculum unless we've got a relationship. And that's the really important part. So thank you, Andrew, for being here today.
It's my pleasure.
And to you, the listener and the viewer, what a wonderful way to finish off this series on instruction, by really going beyond the curriculum to the ways in which we teach and develop those fabulous skills for the future of tomorrow. So our students really are going to be our future. So thank you for listening, and we look forward to the next part of our series next month. Thank you.